and all over a small company called Westland.
The Ministry of Defence still hopes that the shareholders will reject the deal, something Westland's management will fight against. But some politicians feel it's the thin end of the wedge, which would end up with Westland as an assembly operation for a vast American company.
Westland had been highly successful in the past, but the company had fallen on hard times. It needed help, and the only solution was a tie-up with another bigger company. Leon Brittan, now in charge at the DTI, thought the US company Sikorsky was the answer. Defence Secretary Michael Heseltine wanted a European solution and had tried to secure a deal involving Italy, France, Germany and the UK.
The argument developed inside government about really who should make our helicopters. And Michael Heseltine was very keen on what one might call the European solution, and Leon Brittan more on the American-type solution. The Prime Minister certainly, on general grounds, favoured the American-type solution. But the thing got out of hand, and she mishandled it. And for the first time, really, in her premiership, her grip of government wavered.
The row between Leon Brittan and Michael Heseltine continued into the new year. At Westland itself, the board and workforce were minded to accept the American offer, but they were still subject to intense lobbying by Heseltine's European consortium.
The Europeans' plans for helicopters are not at all well defined, but should they come through, potentially the European route would offer a better prospect in the long term for Westland. It's got to balance all those factors. My own feeling is they will probably come down on the side of the European offer in the end.
Michael Heseltine was by now convinced there was a dirty tricks campaign against him. There was a showdown at the cabinet meeting on the 9th of January. Heseltine found himself isolated and is said to have erupted. Then, after collecting his papers, he walked out of the cabinet.
The Conservative chairman, Norman Tebbit, denied that Mr Heseltine had stormed out of the cabinet.
Michael didn't storm out, and I think that's going over the top. Michael did what he did, I think, with very great regret, and I think we were all surprised, but he said that he couldn't accept the procedure. He accepted the decisions and entirely supported them, but he couldn't accept the procedure, and I think that was sad, in my view.
Once he saw that the machinery of government, as he perceived it, was ranged against him, he was not going to get, in his view, a fair crack of the argument, then he obviously began to think, I'm not going to put up with this, how can I show that best? By walking out, and the theatrical side of him asserted itself, and he walked out.
But Heseltine's resignation wasn't the end of the story. He launched a scathing attack on Mrs Thatcher during his personal statement to the House of Commons, and the war of words continued for several weeks. It was all complicated by a row over the leak of a letter from the Solicitor General that had been sent earlier on in the saga to Michael Heseltine.
What is a leak? A leak is an unauthorised disclosure of information. Who can authorise disclosures of information? Ministers. Who authorised the disclosure of information in this case? A minister, Leon Brittan. So why was it a leak? And the answer is, it was only a leak because it was a piece of discourtesy. He didn't consult the other ministers involved. It wasn't a government leaking against the opposition. It was a government fighting among itself.
Eventually, Leon Brittan was forced to quit. He handed in his resignation on the 24th of January.
Can I ask you why you decided to resign at this point in the proceedings?
I don't think I wish to give an interview just at the moment. Thank you very much.
He'd lost support, I think, in his own party. But it was a harbinger of doom that eventually overtook Margaret Thatcher, and at the base of it was the big internal argument within the government about Europe, between the Eurosceptics and the Europhiles, Montagues and Capulets.
Westland was finally taken over by the American company Sikorsky, and Michael Heseltine moved to the Tory backbenches. But the affair had been damaging to the party and left Mrs Thatcher thinking hard about her own position.
Up to then, she had been able to rely on collective cabinet responsibility. And when Michael Heseltine stormed out, because she had ordered him, basically, to shut up, and he felt it was such a point of principle that he couldn't support this and walked out of the cabinet, I think she was just utterly bewildered that anybody would behave like that, because her code of government and ministerial responsibility meant that if Michael didn't agree with it, then Michael should have stayed and joined with the rest of us in carrying forward the Cabinet's decision. But that shows, of course, that over her time in government, how things were beginning to change, that people got to the stage where they felt that she was beginning to act in an autocratic manner.
Mrs. Thatcher had faced many a challenge to her policies and to her person, so it was extraordinary that in her second term the event that almost toppled her from power was a row over a small manufacturing company. From this point, the Thatcher cabinet was split between a generally sceptical group and a small number loyal to the PM. Her policies would not necessarily be changed, but she had been dealt a severe blow.
I hoped that the lesson of Westland would be that she would actually be a bit more conscious of cabinet, a bit more receptive to advice, provided it was loyally intended, and you know, a bit more open in her ways. But she didn't really. She went back to that rather autocratic way of taking decisions in cabinet, which in the end built up the opposition which destroyed her.
In the next programme, how Mrs. Thatcher took on the unions and won.